When I talk to someone about starting seeds indoors, there's 3 things I tell them that are really important. You need to keep the soil damp, you need to keep the soil warm, and once the seeds have sprouted, you need to give the plants a ton of light. But it's not always clear how they can accomplish those things. So today, I'm going to share my setup for starting seeds indoors. Stick around. This is In the Garden. Thanks for joining me. Whether you're a new viewer or returning subscriber, I'm glad you're here. This is In the Garden, where I share tips and tools to help new gardeners be successful in backyard vegetable gardening. Today, I'm talking about starting seeds indoors, and I'm going to show you my seed starting setup so I can show you how I accomplish those 3 really important things when starting seeds indoors. Keeping the soil damp, keeping the soil warm, and providing a ton of light for the new plants. But before I get started, make sure you hit that like button so I know you're enjoying the video. And if you're new here, consider subscribing so you can get all my latest content. My setup is pretty simple. It doesn't really contain anything that's a specialized gardening product. Everything I discussed today, you can purchase at one of your local stores like your Walmart or home improvement store or online. I'll put links in the description for everything so you can find them easily if you want to find out more information. When planning your seed starting system, you need to consider where you're going to actually keep everything while you're waiting for your seeds to sprout and keeping them indoors before it's time to plant them outside. They can take up a lot of space, so you need to really think about where you're going to have enough room to keep them and then also be able to provide for those 3 really important things. If you don't have a good spot to keep them, you're not going to be able to provide the lighting and the moisture and the temperatures that they need to sprout and grow healthy. My solution to this is to use a wire shelf. It has a lot of room on it, and even with the way I plant my seeds, I can still fit up to 180 plants on this one shelf. And it fits right in the corner of my living room, so it's inside where it's warm, it's out of the way, and it's not an eyesore. In my opinion, a wire shelf is a better choice than something that has solid shelves because it makes it really easy to put lights up on the shelf and adjust them and move them around as you need to. The lights I'm using are just standard LED shop lights. They're not fancy grow lights or plant lights or anything like that. These are really inexpensive compared to some of those specialty options that you can find. The ones I'm currently using run about $20, and a grow light in a similar style would be $60 to $80 minimum. The biggest difference between these lights and a grow light is the spectrum of light. Grow lights have a full spectrum, so they can provide the plants all the types of light that they need to grow really well, where these lights don't have all that. But for starting seeds indoors, these will work just fine. If you want or you can afford to buy the grow lights and that's what you choose, those are great. That's a really great option. But if you can't or you don't want to spend that kind of money, you could definitely use these standard shop lights and they will work just fine. The shop lights are hung on each shelf using these chains and hooks. These work really great because you can put them as low as you need to and then raise them up slowly as the plants grow to keep them above the height of the plants. Also, because these are LED lights, they don't use a ton of power. So plugging in, even though I have 6 of them running on my shelf right now, it's not really gonna take a ton of electricity. So I'm not gonna see my electric bill skyrocket by having these lights all plugged in. You could also use standard like fluorescent type shop lights, and those would work fine too. And you can actually get a larger spectrum of light using those types of lights, but you're gonna have more electricity being used on those. They're not gonna be so energy efficient like the LED lights are. One of the nice things about LED lights is that they have a really long lifespan. Compared to the fluorescents, which you have to replace pretty much every year as the bulbs burn out, these LED lights that I have, I've been using them for several years. I think the oldest ones I purchased were over 3 years ago. This is the 3rd or 4th year that I've been using the same ones without having to replace them. As far as holding the soil and planting the seeds, I just use plastic cups to hold everything. I don't use any special seed starting trays, and my reason for that is once those seedlings start, if you have one of those large trays with, like 70 plants can grow in it, once they get a couple inches tall, they're too big to be in that tray anymore, and you have to transplant them anyways. So I just skip that step and I put them in larger containers right at the start. Now this makes it where I have to have a lot more space right from the start when planting my seeds, but it saves me the time and trouble of having to replant things in a few weeks when they get too big. I know a lot of people use those seed starting trays and they work really well for them, and if that's how it is for you, then you should absolutely use those and do it that way. This is just the way that I found that's best for me, that I like to do it. I place all the cups into these metal trays. These are just disposable roasting pans. Compared to a lot of the other seed starting supplies, this is really inexpensive. Now the drawback to that is you're gonna need a lot more soil, you're gonna have to fill those cups up, and it's gonna take up a lot more space like I said before. Now that I've kind of shown you everything that I'm using in my seed setup, I'm gonna explain how these actually work together to provide for those three really important things: keeping the seeds damp, keeping the seeds warm, and providing lots of light once they've sprouted. First, let's talk about how to keep the soil moist while waiting for the seeds to sprout. Some of those seed starting trays, they come with covers that are really nice, and it helps create almost like a miniature greenhouse while waiting for those seeds to sprout. But we can recreate that with just one really simple product, some plastic wrap. If we place plastic wrap over the tops of all the seed containers within one tray, we can seal that in and make it like a miniature greenhouse. That's gonna keep the soil from drying out while waiting for those seeds to sprout. Next, let's talk about keeping the seeds warm. One of the most common ways that gardeners start their seeds and keep them warm is by using heating mats. But heating mats are pretty expensive and you might not want to invest in that, especially if you're just getting started. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna use the lights to kind of double purpose for not only light, but also for heating. These LED lights and also the fluorescent type lights, they give off just a little bit of heat. They're not really, really hot. The fluorescent are hotter than the LEDs, but they're still not super hot. So we're actually just gonna put those really close to our containers, and the heat coming from those is gonna be just enough to keep the seeds warm. And you'll be surprised, if you put your hand under them, you'll feel, well, this isn't really that hot. Is it actually gonna be enough? But it actually heats up the soil to a really nice temperature for sprouting seeds. We try to put it probably within about an inch of the top of the containers. We don't want it to be right against them, where it's not gonna get any airflow, because we don't want the lights to overheat or something because they're not getting enough airflow around them, but close enough that there's actually gonna be some of that ambient heat going into the soil for the seeds. And then because we put the plastic wrap on top, that's actually gonna heat it up a little bit more inside those containers, because now it's working like a greenhouse and trapping that heat inside. The light's gonna go through the plastic wrap, warm up the soil, and then the heat's gonna get trapped inside. So it's gonna create a really nice atmosphere for getting those seeds to start sprouting. And then of course, having enough light for the seeds once they've sprouted. With all these lights that we've put up, the light's pretty much self-explanatory. We're just gonna keep that light right above the plants as they start to sprout. And as they start to grow, we'll move them up using the chains to keep them just a couple inches above the plants as they grow. We can move the plants around so we can always keep the tall ones together and the shorter ones together, so that the lights are always in the best place for all the plants. And then there's something that's really nice about using these plastic cups and also using the metal baking trays, is that it makes it really easy to water the plants. In each of the cups, I've drilled a hole in the bottom so that the water can not only drain out of the cups, but it can actually go up through the bottom into the cups. So watering all these plants is really easy. I can just put about a half an inch to an inch of water in each of the baking trays, and that's gonna pull up through the bottoms of the cups and water the plants. So it's really easy to water all these plants. If I have to hand water 100+ plants, it's gonna take me a long time. But if I just have 6 trays full of plants, I can water them really quickly just by putting a little bit into each of those trays. So that's basically my seed starting setup. You can see that I recreated a lot of the features of the more expensive products using these less expensive ones to get the same result. And that's a really good way to get started in gardening. And even if you're a seasoned gardener, you're just trying to save a little bit of money, you can use some of these. But these are really great ideas for new gardeners that are just trying to get started and don't want to spend a ton of money. This whole setup behind me, it can hold up to 180 plants if I fill it up all the way. And the whole setup probably only cost me about $200, including all the trays and cups. So I can get 200 plants for about $200, but then the most expensive parts, the shelf and the lights, I'm gonna reuse those year after year after year. So next year when I go to plant the plants again, it's gonna cost me a lot less to replant 200 more plants. So this is a really great option to save some money and get started in gardening. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, make sure you hit the like button and subscribe so you can get all my latest content. Thanks for watching. Have a good one.